For many young gamers, their first taste of adrenaline-fueled, radical action came in the form of the Blue Blur himself, Sonic the Hedgehog.
Sonic the Hedgehog is tubular, he's radical, he's got attitude, he doesn't want to wait around for no one.
Sonic's the name, and speed is his game. This zippy-zappy rival of Mario's has made a name for himself over the years.
I grew up in America in the 1980s, so I am a massive Nintendo fanboy, and even I know that Sonic is cooler.
And through ups and downs, Sonic the Hedgehog has remained as one of the most beloved and recognizable icons of gaming as a whole.
The speed of Sonic the Hedgehog and the ability to be able to control him so fluently and so easily, it was the perfect combination. They nailed that game.
But what challenges did the Blue Hedgehog face? Was he as lightning fast as we all remember him? Or is Sega's mascot destined to always come last? Well, lace up those sneakers and grab some chili dogs, because we're about to find out all about the legacy of the Hedgehog that put Sega on the map. Try to keep up. Let's roll! As the golden age of arcades dawned in the early 1980s, Sega began to emerge as one of the industry's brightest stars. Their games were bold, flashy, and designed to get your attention. But arcades weren't enough. Like many of their competitors, Sega recognized the potential of home consoles and entered the ring in 1983 with the SG-1000. Unfortunately for Sega, that was the very same day Nintendo launched the family computer. And while Nintendo quickly found its footing, Sega struggled to gain a hold in the Japanese market. In Japan and North America, Sega remained in Nintendo's shadow. Even with upgraded hardware, Sega needed more than just bits and bytes. They needed a hero. Something, or rather, someone, who could give Sega an identity as powerful and recognizable as Mario gave Nintendo.
Towards the end of the 1980s, Nintendo was absolutely dominating the video game market, and Sega wanted a share. Sega marketed itself very differently to Nintendo, much more adult, much edgier, but it wasn't quite enough to take over Nintendo's share of the market. They needed a mascot of their own, just like Mario. So at the end of the 1980s, there was an internal competition within the company to develop a new game that would help compete against Nintendo and against Mario.
The mission was clear: design a mascot, one that could be the face of the brand, one that oozed coolness, appealed to American teenagers, and most importantly, one that could move fast, really fast.
There was plenty of applications go through. There was a rabbit. There was actually an early version of Rice Star. I think it was called Phil. It would use long, stretchy arms.
Out of this creative cauldron came a blue creature with sneakers and 90s attitude to spare that would take Sega from underdog to hedgehog.
They went with a hedgehog, Sonic the Hedgehog, because he could roll up into a ball and actually take out enemies using that mechanic. They wanted a fast character. Sonic the Hedgehog was the perfect answer to Mario's slower platforming.
And with that, the Blue Blur, Sonic the Hedgehog, was born. Sonic's on-screen debut was actually as a foreshadowed cameo as a dangling mirror ornament in 1991's Radmobile. Little did gamers know that this was all to herald the arrival of the first game in the series, 1991's Sonic the Hedgehog, and it was an instant sensation for the Genesis. Sega finally had what they'd long been searching for, a flagship character.
So Sonic the Hedgehog is perfect 90s, almost annoyingly 90s. He's tubular, he's radical, he's got attitude, he doesn't want to wait around for no one. He was intoxicating. If you was at the right age in the 90s, which I was, yeah, you were sucked in.
Players were thrown into a vibrant, high-speed world full of loops, springs, and golden rings. Unlike the slower, more methodical platforming of other games, Sonic was all about momentum. The faster you went, the more exhilarating it became. And at the heart of it all was Sonic's rebellious charm. He tapped his foot impatiently if you stood still, and his victory pose oozed confidence. This wasn't just a game, it was a statement. The man behind Sonic's design was artist Naoto Oshima, while programmer Yuji Naka served as the mastermind behind Sonic's blistering speed and physics engine. Naka famously wrote the core of the game's engine in assembly language, maximizing the Genesis's power to create that iconic smooth motion. It was an impressive technical feat at the time, and one that helped set Sonic apart.
That first game, it was so good. I loved the original Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog is a platformer. It obviously took inspiration from Mario. All these games take inspiration from each other, but what makes Sonic different than other platformers, specifically Mario, was its speed. You can control Sonic nice and slowly, going on different platforms, just like you could a normal, typical platformer like a Mario game, but the speed is what differentiated it from Mario. Being able to zoom through stages, and it just felt so good. The first time going through a loop on Sonic the Hedgehog, you couldn't believe you were playing it. You'd never played a game this fast before.
I couldn't believe how fast Sonic the Hedgehog was when I first played it. It blew my mind, really showed off the power of the Sega Genesis.
The game sold millions of copies and did exactly what Sega had hoped for. In North America especially, Sonic became the face of the Genesis and helped drive its sales well past expectations. And Sega, like the speedster himself, wasted no time building on that momentum. Just a year later, in 1992, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 arrived.
The follow-up games grew the world of Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 featured Tails, a fox with two tails that could fly, which was so exciting.
This game was bigger, faster, and with a new sidekick in tow, Miles Tails Prower, a twin-tailed fox who could fly. Tails was introduced to give Sonic a player too, much like Mario's Luigi. Giving his buddy the ability to fly made him super useful and likable to players instantly. The game introduced the iconic spin dash move and featured massive zones that pushed the Genesis even further, remaining many fans' favorite for a reason. Behind the scenes, development had shifted to Sega Technical Institute in California, with a unique blend of Japanese and American developers collaborating on the sequel. This East meets West fusion led to creative tensions at times, but it also helped shape the game into a global hit. Then came Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles in 1994. Two games originally meant to be one massive title, but split due to cartridge limitations.
Now, Sonic 3 and Knuckles is an interesting one. Yuji Naka only agreed to work on Sonic 3 and Knuckles if he could make the game how he wanted to make it. He wanted to create a 14-stage game. It was so ridiculous. It was going to be way too big for one cartridge. So it was decided very early on they were going to cut the game in two. You got Sonic and Knuckles and Sonic 3, put them together and you do have the full game. They obviously brought in another character for this one, which was going to be Knuckles. Originally, Knuckles was going to be a hedgehog, but they changed that to an echidna.
Players fell in love with these titles, and many fans still hold them in high regard after all these years, as many aspects of them, such as the story-driven gameplay and fun characters, remain a staple of the series to this day. Throughout the early 90s, Sonic wasn't just a gaming mascot. He was a cultural force. Cartoons, comics, toys, even a balloon in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Sega had finally found its edge, and Sonic was racing circles around the competition. Even famous celebrities like Michael Jackson fell in love with the cool little hedgehog, and Jackson himself was even rumored to have worked on the soundtrack for Sonic 3.
One of Sonic's most famous fans was Michael Jackson, and there were rumors that Sonic's design was even inspired by the album covers of Michael Jackson.
One of the important design aspects when it comes to Sonic the Hedgehog was his shoes. Big red with a big buckle on it. They were actually inspired by Michael Jackson's Bad album front cover. You know, who's cooler than Michael Jackson on the Bad album front cover? No one. So they obviously wanted to do that.
But competition was exactly what lay ahead. As Sonic surged in popularity, Nintendo was watching closely, and so began one of the most iconic rivalries in gaming history. A blue hedgehog versus a red plumber? Things were about to get wild. In the early 1990s, the video game world wasn't just growing, it was dividing. And right at the heart of that divide were two titans. The rivalry wasn't just commercial, it was personal, it was cultural, it was war.
I remember embarrassingly arguing which is better, who would win in a fight, you know, all those sort of things. I mean, it's what all kids were doing when they were at primary school. If you was around at that time, everyone had those arguments.
I grew up in America in the 1980s, so I'm a massive Nintendo fanboy, and even I know that Sonic is cooler.
Mario's a great game, but Sonic could absolutely kick his ass. There's no doubt about it.
Despite this apparent power imbalance, Mario was dominant on the battlefield. His games reigned supreme, and he had amassed many followers to his side. A red guy with a mustache giving Sonic trouble? Now there's a surprise. However, the Italian plumber had a glaring weakness. Unlike the red chaotic hedgehog, Mario was seen by many as the more tame one, the family-friendly one, the boring one. Perhaps Sonic could use this to turn the tables.
Mario definitely influenced the original Sonic. I mean, Mario influenced the majority of platformers before Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog was when, and when that came out, everyone was trying to copy Sonic the Hedgehog's speed and good platforming. And then obviously with people being in the Nintendo camp and people being in the Sega camp, and then Sega specifically creating adverts that would show Mario being the slower platformer, the platformer that's more aimed at families, and Sonic was the cooler teenager, hard-edged attitude character. It built up such a huge rivalry between the two, which is stupid because they're actually quite different games.
Sonic was obviously directly inspired by Mario with its side-scrolling platforming gameplay, and of course Sonic collects rings whereas Mario collects coins. But actually, Sonic is a whole new game. Nintendo so dominated the video game market in the 1980s that Sega had to adopt a really aggressive marketing strategy to try and grab some of that market share.
Sonic's commercials were ruthless, with one of them saying the infamous line of, Sega's marketing leaned into speed, attitude, and a sense of rebellion. Sonic wasn't carefully hopping across platforms. He was tearing through them.
Sonic was a very different character to Mario and helped position Sega as punk rebel to Nintendo's boring parent. Sonic was fast and brightly colored and spiky, not just physically, but spiky attitude as well. Real break from the cozy family-friendly games of Nintendo, and people paid attention. Sonic was massively popular and helped Sega to grow even bigger than Nintendo by the mid-1990s.
Sonic was running circles around the pesky plumber, but he wasn't about to back down. Just as Sonic's adventures had taken inspiration from Mario, Mario's own adventures began to take inspiration from Sonic. The battle waged on for years, with both sides taking bits and bobs from each other. Sonic adopted Mario's varied levels, tight level design, and fun single-player content. In turn, Mario took on Sonic's bright and colorful visuals, fun and memorable characters, and more dynamic movement. Things were heating up for sure. As the end of the millennium beckoned on the horizon, both Sonic and Mario were preparing for the biggest jump of all time, the jump to 3D. Mario went first with the critically acclaimed Super Mario 64, but Sonic was right on Mario's tail. He knew he could come out with his own much more exhilarating adventure.
The Sega Saturn didn't have a proper 3D Sonic game. You had the level selection part of Sonic Jam that allowed you to see a 3D Sonic running around. That was quite cool. But there was no proper 3D Sonic game. Sonic R, I suppose you could say that, but not really. The first proper Sonic 3D game came on the Dreamcast with Sonic Adventure, and this is what got me back into gaming. 3D Sonic games get a bad rap, but that original game back in the day when it came out was exceptional. It was so good. The music is still some of the greatest music in any Sonic the Hedgehog game, and that's quite a high bar. The characters, the storytelling, it was absolutely fantastic. Made for a more Japanese audience with its storytelling, but it definitely won me over. Specifically, I remember running into a balcony on the side of a building, the floor giving way, and then all of a sudden Sonic running down the side of the building. My 10-year-old self inside was screaming with excitement, like this is the 3D Sonic game that we always wanted to get.
Sonic Adventure was more than just a new game. It was a reinvention. Sonic now lived in a fully 3D world, speeding through massive environments with cinematic flair. The game introduced voice acting, dramatic cutscenes, and a complex storyline featuring Chaos, an ancient creature threatening to destroy the world.
Come on, Chaos. Time to eat. Chaos? Oh no, isn't that the same monster I saw the other day?
And for many fans, Sonic Adventure was a dream come true, a vision of Sonic's world in full dimension. For a brief moment, it looked like Sega was ready to reclaim the top. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. The industry was changing, budgets were ballooning, competition from Sony's PlayStation was intensifying, and Sega, despite its innovation, was burned by years of rushed hardware, failed peripherals, and internal missteps. Sonic had made the jump to 3D, but would it be enough to save the company? The Dreamcast was supposed to be Sega's comeback. With a solid lineup, online capabilities, and a true leap forward in graphics, it had all the makings of a hit. It launched into the marketplace that had already started to shift. Sony's PlayStation 2 loomed large on the horizon, offering not only cutting-edge games, but the ability to play DVDs, a game-changer for consumers. It was as though Sega was facing up against one of Eggman's most dastardly robots ever. The Dreamcast couldn't maintain momentum.
Sega as a company hasn't really had one continuous existence throughout its history in the same way that Nintendo and Sony have. It's been dissolved and reformed and merged and bought and sold multiple times over its history.
By 2001, just 3 years after Sonic blazed onto the Dreamcast, Sega made a shocking announcement. They were stepping away from the hardware business entirely.
It was a hard pill for Sega fans to swallow. The reason Sega stopped making consoles, you had the lack of third-party support, hardcore competition. There was just no way they were going to win. And yeah, they unfortunately had to stop making consoles because of that. The rivalry between Sonic and Mario did have to change slightly when Sega stopped making consoles. Basically, they had to get along now. And we as Sega fans or Nintendo fans just had to accept that.
For the first time, Sega was no longer a console manufacturer. Instead, they would refocus their efforts as a third-party software developer.
Sega games on a Nintendo console, it was... I'm struggling to think of a more painful time in my gaming history than that. That was tough.
This would have hit Sonic harder than 1,000 egg robots. Mario won. But he couldn't just sit around and feel sorry for himself. The now homeless Hedgehog had to adapt or die. In 2003, he turned to his friends and teamed up with them for the next big adventure, Sonic Heroes.
Knuckles, we're counting on you.
This adventure brought Sonic and his pals together in an exciting way. The bright and sprawling environments the colorful cast of critters found themselves in were built for 3 different play styles. Speedsters like Sonic himself, flyers like his best bud Tails, or powerhouses such as Knuckles. This adventure of his had garnered a cult following in the decades since, but upon release, Sonic fans weren't all that convinced by this radical shift in gameplay. This left Sonic with a feeling of uncertainty about his future. Around this time, a certain other Hedgehog had amassed a huge fan base and decided it was his time to step out of the shadows.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout,
This was Shadow the Hedgehog, the ultimate life form. He was the total opposite of Sonic in almost every way. Serious, violent, and unarguably dark. With a glare on his face and a gun in his hand, he made quite the impression.
Shadow is like Sonic's dark twin. He was created in a lab to be the perfect life form. Shadow has ended up being one of the most popular characters in Sonic because of his goth, edgy feel.
Introduced in Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow the Hedgehog quickly became one of the most beloved and recognizable characters in the franchise. The tonal shift was divisive. While some fans appreciated Shadow's deeper lore and conflicted personality, others were baffled by the shift from chili dog to machine guns. Still, Shadow struck a chord.
Sonic is obviously one of the most popular video game characters of all time, and Shadow is the opposite of Sonic. He's edgy, he's got black and red fur, or spikes, whatever you want to call them. He's cool for a new generation of cool.
But Sonic had bigger fish to fry than Shadow. The exodus from Sega consoles still left the Blue Blur with an identity crisis. Perhaps it was time for a reboot. Then in 2006 came his next adventure, simply titled Sonic the Hedgehog. Dubbed Sonic 06 by fans, this aimed to reinvent the Hedgehog for a new generation. Was it successful? Well,
Oh dear, Sonic 06 was not good. This was Sonic the Hedgehog's big rebrand, hence the name just Sonic the Hedgehog. I remember seeing previews of it. It looked incredible. Unfortunately, it played horrendously. It was definitely rushed towards the end, which is unfortunate because it could be a great game, but being able to slowly walk around entire loops of Sonic without falling off, just constant clipping outside of the game, it was a complete broken mess. It's the game of legends now for all the wrong reasons.
Sonic 06 was a crippling failure for Sonic. Slow movement, glitchy controls, and inappropriate moments soiled Sonic's reputation drastically.
Unfortunately, after Sonic Adventure, Sega didn't really know what to do with Sonic to continue working on 3D Sonic games. It was a tough time. There was so much trial and error. How do you make a 3D platformer work well with a character that runs stupidly fast?
No longer at the heights he once was, Sonic was left not knowing what he wanted to do. How do you come back from such an abysmal failure like 06 over the next decade? Sonic desperately and insecurely tried anything he could so that people wouldn't forget about him.
Essentially what Sega did is they started turning Sonic into more of a racing type game. Sonic and the Black Knight, Sonic and the Secret Rings on the Wii, you would actually use the controller the same way you would drive a car in Mario Kart. You would actually have to steer Sonic left to right through a single track. They weren't well respected, the games. They definitely didn't review very well, but that was the basis of what Sonic would eventually turn into with games like Sonic Generations, Sonic Colors, and originally Sonic Unleashed.
But game after game, journey after journey, nothing could stick the landing. Then came Sonic Unleashed in 2008. This adventure had fans more excited than ever. Crisp, high-definition cutscenes and mind-meltingly outrageous speed made Sonic seem like his old radical self again. That is, until nightfall. Thanks to an unfortunate encounter with Dr. Eggman. As the moon shines in the night sky, Sonic undergoes a hideous transformation into a werehog. But that wasn't the scary part. The breakneck speeds fans were promised was only half of the full picture. The other half was slow hack-and-slash gameplay that went on for ages. Blue blur? More like the blue boar.
Sonic Unleashed is a mixed bag. I still think the intro to the game was incredible. I kind of want to see a movie made the same way the introduction of Sonic Unleashed was made. But the game itself, the 3D stages were incredible, especially the first level. It looked so good and it felt so good. But then you've got the werehog stages. They're not good. They had to add a new mechanic into the game. Instead of adding a new character, they made the werehog.
Things were getting critical for our spiky boy. Sonic had nearly given up hope of ever making a comeback. He was all out of rings and down to his last life. He was searching aimlessly for his second wind, but none of his elaborate plans were coming to fruition. So he decided, like many of us do, when the going gets tough, to take a trip down memory lane. Then, in 2011, a light broke through the chaos. Sonic Generations was a celebration of the franchise's 20th anniversary, and it was exactly what fans needed. In this outing, Sonic got to relive the glory days through a selection of some of his greatest levels from across the years, in both his modern and classic look.
Sonic had a bad rap. It was getting better with games like Colors and the Sonic stages of Unleashed, and Sonic Generations was when they perfected it. Sonic Generations was not only how they perfected that formula, but they also was able to bring in the retro fans. Sonic Generations was a mix between all of the stages throughout Sonic's life. The platforming on the 2D stages wasn't perfect when compared to the 2D stages, but it definitely gave you enough to make you want to play through the whole game. They finally perfected what they called the Sonic engine.
By blending old-school momentum-based platforming with the speed and spectacle of modern Sonic, Generations finally struck the balance that had been missing for so long. Critics praised the level design, visuals, and soundtrack, and longtime fans welcomed it as a return to form. Getting to relive the glory days and look upon his younger self was just what Sonic needed, and all the fans' praise reminded him that he still had some gas in the tank. But the question remained, what came next? The Hedgehog was running again and faster than ever. He had even decided to let bygones be bygones with his old rival Mario.
When Mario and Sonic finally got to be in a game together in Super Smash Bros., that was actually awesome. They fought together and they were a good rivalry, you know, like no character was really more powerful than the other. I'm sure there's Smash Brothers fans out there that will argue that, but it was really, really good. What didn't go down well, in my opinion, was when they both worked together in their Olympics games. That was the most stupid thing ever. The games are actually quite fun. There's quite a few of them and they're always good fun games. They're essentially like Mario Party games and they were created by Sega as well, which is even more confusing when you see those original trailers and you see Mario and Sonic in a running race. You're like, hang on, what's going on here?
Following the success of Generations, fans hoped Sega had finally found its footing. The formula was working. So naturally, the next move was to shake it up again. Sonic Generations proved that there was still a hungry audience for the blue blur, but Sonic only used this as an excuse to try and innovate once again. With the release of Generations, Sonic was running again and faster than ever. The very next game, Sonic Lost World, aimed to try something completely different. Levels shaped like tubes with their own gravity all around them, and corridor-style gameplay with elements from the first game in them. Needless to say, the results were mixed, and the reinvention wouldn't cease from there.
The 3D Sonic games were really imaginative and told great stories, but they were also a little bit gimmicky and fiddly, and they weren't hugely successful.
And then 3 years later came another major reinvention. Sonic Boom: Rise of Lyric. Despite the drastic shift in art style done to try and cater to an American audience, the game was heavily ridiculed upon release, and for good reason. The glitches were plentiful, and the gameplay was a generic, boring mess.
Yeah, it's not a respected game. I have played it, and you really, really have to push yourself to keep playing it. The unfortunate thing is, now they've got another company working on Sonic Boom, and every time someone new comes in, they try new things. And it's one of Sega's biggest issues with the Sonic franchise. They'll get it right, and then they'll try something else. They don't continue on making the games that they get right. They don't continue on with that formula, or at least they don't do it too often.
Time and time again, failure after failure, Sonic just couldn't cut the mustard. The success of Sonic Generations should have been a wake-up call for the Hedgehog. Instead, he was frantically trying everything he could to recapture his radical speed. But the one thing Sonic could never outrun was his destiny. Could this be it for the Hedgehog? Is this really how his story ends? It was in this dire moment that he turned to the one thing that had kept him afloat all these years: his fans. Sonic's fans are some of the most dedicated people on Earth. They absolutely adore the Sonic franchise and its many colorful characters. Though disappointed in what Sonic had become, one particular group of fans gave Sonic a reality check and reminded him of who he used to be. Sonic Mania was a hit. Built in the retro style of the original games, but with modern polish. It featured stunning pixel art, reimagined zones, and a soundtrack that captured the series' essence.
It's very bizarre. Sega are quite protective of their IPs, as you would be. Nintendo, incredibly protective of their IPs as well. All these companies would be, but for some reason, Sega allow the Sonic community to create as many fan games of Sonic the Hedgehog as they wish, as long as there's no money involved, blah, blah, blah. And these people that make these fan games, more often than not, were making better games than what Sega were able to put out themselves. And every time Sega put out a 3D game that wasn't reviewed very well, endless amounts of reviews would say, the fans can make the games better than Sega themselves, which is why it's so confusing that Sega allowed this to happen. Thankfully, they did allow it to happen because they got Christian Whitehead and some of the other Sonic fan game creators to create Sonic Mania officially for Sega. And if you ask me, Sonic Mania is the best Sonic game created by Sega since the original trilogy and Knuckles and CD.
With this newfound victory, bringing him back to his feisty roots, Sonic was more confident than ever before. He had assurance in his heart that his fans would be eternally loyal to him no matter what. You know what that means. Time for another big step into a wild, open world. For the first time, players explored massive open zones, combining high-speed platforming with an almost Zelda Breath of the Wild style structure.
The gameplay style of Sonic Generations was eventually adapted into games like Sonic Frontiers, which turned the game into a more open world, very story-driven game. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the story, but it was hugely successful, and I think moving forward for Sonic, this is going to, well, hopefully, this is going to be the formula they continue to try and take from when they make future Sonic games.
It was an ambitious shift, placing Sonic in a moody, mysterious world of ruins, puzzles, and towering enemies. Reception was mixed but hopeful. While the game had rough edges, many agreed it was a step in the right direction. Sonic was evolving again, this time into something fresh and with genuine potential. With more eyes on the franchise than ever before, and the familiarity of his golden days in his heart, our prickly, plucky young pal was back and poised to spin dash right into Hollywood.
Where are you leaving? I don't know where San Francisco is.
It's west.
West?
Straight shot, can't miss it.
Fine, that's cool. I'm totally cool saying goodbye now. So, as I crashed into the cold, dark water of the Pacific, I realized a few things.
Movie adaptations of video games have an absolutely terrible reputation, starting with the Super Mario Bros. Movie in the 90s. Oh, that was bad! One of the first actually good movies to adapt a video game was Sonic the Hedgehog. I took my kids to see Sonic the Hedgehog at the cinema, and it's introducing Sonic the Hedgehog to a whole new generation.
So originally, when the Sonic the Hedgehog movie trailer dropped, it was not well received. Gangsta's Paradise played, Ugly Sonic was shown, as he's now known. And yeah, he was called Ugly Sonic because he looks absolutely terrible. I think maybe they made him look so ugly originally that they could then go back and use that as a marketing tool. And this is just my theory, because he was so ugly originally and so badly designed originally that when they came back, everyone was completely fine with the new design. Just my theory. But either way, yeah, those Sonic the Hedgehog movies, I mean, they're great. They're a great way to watch the movies. I've got a young son, watching those with my kids, it's so made for everyone. And I think they pulled them off brilliantly.
It also featured tremendous star power. Idris Elba as the seriously stalwart Knuckles, Keanu Reeves as the dark and bitter Shadow, and Jim Carrey in one of his most praised performances to date as the nefarious Dr. Eggman. It was fun, it was heartfelt, and it made bank. The success of Sonic the Hedgehog and its even more ambitious sequels in 2022 and 2024 reintroduced Sonic to pop culture on a massive scale. Now, new fans were discovering the blue blur not through a console, but through the big screen. After decades of reinventions, reinforcements, and reboots, Sonic remains one of gaming's most iconic characters. Whether he's racing through Green Hill Zone, fighting gods in cyberspace, or cracking jokes on the silver screen, he continues to capture imaginations. Not every spin dash has landed perfectly, but that's always been part of Sonic's charm. bold, risky, rebellious.
Sonic has got a hardcore fan base. I don't exactly know why. I think it's because Sega and Sonic specifically appeals to such a large fan base. You know, like adults know Sonic and love Sonic, kids like Sonic. Sonic is on everything merch-wise, and I think that's maybe why Sonic is so loved online.
Sonic the Hedgehog is the fastest thing alive. As long as he has rings in his possession and a couple chili dogs to spare, there's nothing the Blue Blar can't outrun. Although no longer in the console race, and at the heights they once were, Sega is a name that will forever be tied to their prized hedgehog. To many, Sonic has become the laughingstock of the internet, a shell of his former glory. Years of deliberation, reinvention, and prevarication have left a sour taste in mouths around the world. But Sonic the Hedgehog never gives up. He remains as one of the most beloved and recognizable icons of gaming. Through his exciting movies and absolutely obsessed fan base, the franchise shows no sign of slowing down. Gotta go fast!